There will come a moment when the empath wakes to an unnamed, irrevocable truth the old ways no longer hold. You find the chore of pleasing everyone unbearable. You no longer have the energy to scan the room for other people's emotions before you feel your own. You stop being a safe container for what never belonged to you. This shift is not theatrical, it arrives quietly, almost by exhaustion, long seasons of disappointment, relationships that siphon you dry, the slow accumulation of a familiar, unmistakable thought, I cannot keep living like this. In S manner, this is the stirrings of the true self, not a vanity boost or sudden stoicism, but the emergence of a part you once hid to survive your earlier world. You were not merely too sensitive, you were using an old survival script: empathize to avoid conflict, soothe to secure acceptance, absorb to belong. That strategy served when you were small, but it will not sustain an authentic life. As the true self rises, the invisible curses, ancestral fears, brittle beliefs, unreasonable bindings begin to crack, not because you summoned heroic strength, but because honesty with yourself rearranges. The heart, some things must be let go, some ties must be loosened, some former selves must be folded away. This is not mysticism, it is adulthood. The empath's orbit shifts from the terror of losing someone to the harder, truer question: am I losing myself? Once that question becomes central, the old spells begin to fall apart on their own. The first sign is mundane, a steady weariness of being the version others expect, a fatigue with always playing the strong one, the patient one, the unconditional listener who calms everyone while their own feelings go unread. The unconscious, as I have written, sends small disturbances, boredom, sudden irritability, the uncanny sense of living a life that belongs to someone else. Research into highly sensitive persons, Elaine Aron's work, shows a nervous system that amplifies emotional signals, nudging you into caregiver roles. And contemporary polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges, helps explain why the body, when overtaxed, rebels and forces an exit from old survival patterns. Your nervous system once learned to placate in order to stay safe. Now it presses you toward discomfort, so you will stop sacrificing your center. You find you will no longer tolerate what you once mistook for devotion. This is the quiet revolution of the empath's awakening, not a single thunderclap, but a steady, luminous undoing of what never served the soul. You no longer easily excuse disrespect, and you no longer remain in relationships where you end up apologizing even when you have done nothing wrong. This is not a shift in personality, it is your truest self reclaiming its rightful ground. The old curses that once governed you, believing you must carry the weight of others' emotions, believing sacrifice is the price of love, believing your needs must always come last, begin to look absurd the moment you become honest about your exhaustion, and that honesty is the quiet entrance of the true self. Not loud, not rebellious, simply a clear knowing that you can no longer trade your peace to preserve bonds that do not protect you. In that moment, exhaustion becomes revelation, not a weakness, but the soul insisting on a more truthful, more authentic, more just way of living. From that still but decisive recognition, every old curse begins to fracture. You realize you no longer have the strength to carry emotions that are not yours. Conversations that once triggered fear now leave only emptiness. Promises you once clung to feel strangely hollow, as if some deeper part of you refuses to be deceived. Describe this as the stage when the shadow begins to speak, the moment the suppressed self demands a voice. You do not resist this process, you simply cannot keep performing the old role. The habits of apologizing to preserve harmony, staying silent to avoid disappointment, shrinking to remain likable all fall away like garments that no longer fit. You cannot explain it logically, you only know your body, intuition, and emotions say, not anymore. I must stop. Research on self-compassion, such as that by Kristen Neff, shows that when a person grows exhausted from meeting every need but their own, it is not selfishness, it is a psychological summons back to the self. Your body is leading you home. This is why you no longer feel suited to the rescuer's role, why relationships that once consumed your effort now leave you breathless, why the performance of pleasantness feels impossible. You are not becoming cold, you are simply refusing to use kindness as a disguise for old wounds. In this quiet rearrangement, you begin to see what you once avoided: one-sided connections, conversations that disregard your feelings, people who seek you only when they need energy, and compromises you once mistook for love. You see these things not from judgment, but because the rising light of the true self casts illumination on the shadows you lived with for too long. And when that light appears, fear-based patterns begin to fall apart. You no longer fear being alone, no longer fear people leaving, no longer fear disappointing others. The only lingering fear becomes, if I continue like this, will I still be myself? That question marks the threshold of transformation, the moment the empath stops, not from weakness, but because they have traveled far enough to understand that gentleness does not mean remaining silent before their own pain. And when you stand at this doorway, the old curses lose their power. You begin to see with a new clarity that some relationships must be left, some memories allowed to rest, some boundaries firmly set, and some forgotten parts of you must be called home after years of abandonment. When the old mechanisms have cracked, a subtle yet potent movement begins to unfold inside you, the soul intent on reclaiming what belongs to it. This is not rebellion, nor the ego's boast. It is an inner retrieval of sovereignty that described as a return to the center of the self, where you stop orbiting other people's emotions and begin to orbit yourself. Curiously, you need not force it. The shift arrives as naturally as a heartbeat. You begin to notice the feelings you once muted, to feel the unease in conversations that once held your polite smile, to hear the exhaustion in your body each time you try to explain yourself to those who never meant to understand. The deepest dawn is this: you have been silent too long in your own life. Heinz Kohut observed that deeply empathic people often live in a state of self-delusion, their sense of self stretched thin to accommodate others. When the true self returns, those overstretched cords recoil toward the center. You feel unmistakably that you can no longer allow other people's emotions to fill the whole space of your mind. You want that space back, your voice back, the peace you once traded to avoid disappointment. Then a clear truth rises: you will not be loved at the cost of losing yourself. You begin to choose truth over comfort, to question what you once accepted on autopilot, to feel uncomfortable when boundaries are crossed, and you no longer bury that discomfort. This is the opening of individuation, the slow becoming whole. It does not begin with severance, but with a quiet resetting of the inner compass. Instead of asking, "What must I do to keep them happy?" you ask, "Does this betray me?" Once that question guides you, chaos becomes legible. You can tell genuine affection from dependency, care from manipulation, connection from fear-built attachment. As this light of awareness spreads, something profound occurs. You call back the parts of yourself that were left behind, the strength you dimmed so you would not be too much, the clarity you muted to avoid hurting others, the sensitivity you once branded a flaw and now recognize as your deepest intuition. They return to stand beside you, as if they had never left, only you had been too busy being what others wanted to notice how whole you truly were. This is not a personality change, it is a homecoming, a return to a self that never truly vanished, only hid beneath years of other people's expectations. And when the soul reclaims its sovereignty, life turns a new page. You no longer live to please the world, but to avoid betraying yourself. What follows is not a plan, but a consequence. Relationships begin to shift, as if invisible architectures are realigning to this new frequency of you. Empaths live in constant contraction. You shrink so others feel safe, step back so they won't be threatened, stay silent to prevent conflict. When you stop shrinking, the veil lifts. You notice who respected your presence and who merely respected your silence, who loved you and who loved the comfort of your availability, who wanted your growth and who needed you stalled in a version they could control. Once said, we do not know the true nature of a relationship until one person begins to change. In that change, some grow distant, not from hate, but from not knowing how to exist with your boundaries. Some grow irritated, because the unseen leverage they relied on has gone. Some wait to see if this new you will pass. Others soften and become sincere, because at last they see you as a human with needs, limits, and a voice. Relationships do not vanish so much as sift themselves, and this filtering asks nothing of you beyond the way you now treat yourself. When you stop enduring, those who fed on your endurance drift away. When you stop giving energy unquestioningly, the draining relationships fall. When you stop carrying others' emotions, those who truly value feeling come closer. The mature truth here is stark. Not everyone who leaves is a loss, and not everyone who stays is a blessing. The pain is not merely loss, but the dawning awareness of how much you endured. And that pain is a gift, for it lets you view your emotional history with compassion rather than blame. You see how fiercely you tried to hold one-sided bonds, how you bent yourself to keep people who never kept you, how fear once drove you to avoid being left. Now a quiet, potent truth rises: you have not lost yourself. You are only losing the version of yourself that accepted less than you deserved, and as that old self dissolves, your world quietly restructures around someone who knows their worth without asking permission. This is the deepest shift. You stop adjusting your energy to prop up relationships and let them adjust to the truth of your presence. When the old ties rearrange and the familiar loops no longer pull you back, something new grows inside, a strength you always carried but could not access. Not hardness, not coldness, but a steady capacity to stand in your life without trembling at other people's emotions. This is the new center Jung named, an inner point stable enough that you no longer bend to every surrounding fluctuation. Where once you oscillated between dissolving into others and retreating in exhaustion, the true self brings a rare equilibrium, empathic without self-erasure, listening without taking responsibility for another's feelings, kind without being exploitable. This strength comes not from effort, but from clarity about boundaries, about what you accept and what you reject, about which emotions are yours and which are not, about where to invest and what to release. As that clarity spreads, life shifts in subtle, irreversible ways. Situations that once triggered panic now prompt a measured pause. Those who once touched your most fragile nerves no longer have access. Criticisms that once broke you recede to background noise. You are not growing insensitive. You are no longer weaponizing your sensitivity against yourself. You see what was hidden. You need not fight to be loved, nor shrink to be accepted. Love becomes resonance, attention becomes alignment, relationships become chosen expansion rather than escape. External change matters less than this inner reformation. You will not let the world set your worth. What leaves are only what no longer fits, and as you stand in that energy, your life opens, lighter, clearer, more true, and, naturally, begins to attract people of a different kind. This is not coincidence. It is the inevitable consequence of your frequency changing. Because you once lived attuned to other people's feelings, you became an unwitting anchor for those without inner steadiness. People who could not heal sought your energy to fill their emptiness. Those afraid of solitude clung to your empathy as shelter. Those unwilling to face their shadow used you as a mirror to avoid truth. But when your true self rises, you stop emitting the signal, lean on me. Instead, you emit the signal, I stand on my own, and you should, too. When that signal appears, the kinds of people who come toward you begin to transform. The irresponsible with their feelings grow uneasy. Those who fed on others' energy find you unreadable because you no longer respond in the predictable way they relied upon. Those who once slipped easily into your life now remain outside, not because you bar them, but because they cannot cross the invisible boundary you have newly built, self-respect. Fascinatingly, you do not try to keep anyone, nor push anyone away. The filtering occurs on its own. Call this the soul's resonance. We attract those who vibrate with our inner center, and as that center clarifies, incompatible ties dissolve. Then new kinds of people arrive, people who own their emotions, who respect boundaries even when unspoken, who do not come to be saved but to grow beside you, who are neither cowed by your strength nor eager to exploit your softness. They meet you at eye level, not above or below, and they do not love merely the pleasant version of you, but see light and shadow without fleeing. When you meet such people, you understand something profound. You were never lacking love, only relationships mature enough not to ask you to betray yourself, and because you have reclaimed your true self, new forms of connection appear, connection not built on need, but on recognition, not held by fear of loss, but by the freedom of two souls, not to fill a void but to expand together. This is a quiet, transformative stage. You stop asking, who will stay with me? And begin asking, who aligns with the chapter I am stepping into? When that question guides you, you no longer fear solitude, for loneliness ceases to be a void and becomes the doorway through which the right people enter. And as new connections form, you look back and see your past differently. The pain that once shattered you no longer carries the same meaning. You do not deny it, nor romanticize it. Instead, you come to see it as the necessary layer of growth you had to pass through to become who you are today. Once said, there is no awakening without pain, and standing here that truth rings clear. Without the times you were overlooked, you would not have learned self-value. Without the one-sided ties, you would not have learned reciprocity. Without the moments your kindness was taken, you would not have learned the meaning of boundaries. Without the drain of rescuing, you would never have dared to abandon that road. All that pain was not merely injury but guidance. It brought you to the point of asking, who am I living for? And is this truly mine? That question opened the very path you now walk. From the perspective of Carl Rogers' therapeutic view, people grow only when they feel safe enough to face themselves without defense, and you now see how every wound pushed you toward that authenticity. Astonishingly, you no longer identify as a victim of life, but as a human learning how to be human. You loved as you knew how, gave as you could, endured as you thought was normal. Nothing was wrong, you simply did not yet know another way. Now you do, and so you no longer resent the past or blame yourself for not leaving sooner. You feel gratitude for not having given up, for had you quit midway, you would never have reached this place where the true self awakens and begins to reshape your life. The most beautiful fact is this: what once broke you now forms the foundation of who you are becoming. Old wounds cease to be shame and become pieces of the map. The memories that tightened your chest now mark how far you have come. The moments you were underestimated remind you you deserve more than you once settled for. Seeing this, you understand pain did not come to destroy, but to open the one door you feared to touch, the door back to yourself. Looking back with matured eyes, one thing is unmistakable: you are becoming the version your life has always waited for. Not perfect by another's standard, but most authentically you, no longer sacrificing to survive, no longer masking pain with kindness, no longer using empathy to haul along those unwilling to grow. This is the stage named the reintegration of the self. Light and shadow cease to struggle and begin to collaborate, and what once seemed a weakness, your sensitivity, vulnerability, consuming empathy becomes, at last, a source of renewed strength. When placed in the right position, they become intuition, clarity, and the ability to perceive the truth of human nature without a single word. At the same time, the parts of you you once hid, your strength, your sharpness, your decisiveness, your clarity, step forward with a calmness that surprises even you. When these two sides merge, something happens. You no longer choose between heart and boundary, between love and self-protection, between empathy and truth. You are both, and that unity yields the strongest version of you yet. You begin to live differently, not by effort, but by simply being. You respond to old wounds with new steadiness. You say no without trembling. You choose yourself not against others, but alongside them. You stop attracting the same kinds of people because you no longer broadcast the frequency of someone who will accept less than they deserve. The world has not changed. You have changed the way you stand in it. When you live aligned with the true self, life becomes lighter, not because everything turns pleasant, but because you stop fighting yourself. You stop straining to hold everything together, stop pretending peace to avoid conflict, stop hiding emotions out of fear of being misunderstood, stop shrinking so others won't feel threatened by your light. You are simply whole, clear, awake. And the most beautiful fact is this: in this stage you feel a peace you may not have known for years, a peace even when you are alone. No more fear of abandonment, no more terror of losing someone, no more dread of being misunderstood, because you now know that what rejects you was never meant for you, and what is meant for you will not leave. You stop reacting to life and start choosing how to live, no longer dragged, now leading, no longer clinging, now letting go at the right time, no longer waiting to be understood, now choosing to understand yourself first. In this state, you realize you have become the person you were always searching for. At the journey's end, you learn a truth only experience can teach. Every pain that nearly broke you was training you to become someone darkness can no longer touch, not because you are stronger than others, but because you have suffered enough to see that real strength is born of self-understanding, not mere endurance. When the true self rises, you do not become supernatural, you become authentic. You do not become invulnerable, you become wise. You do not become a light others cling to, you become a light that keeps you from losing your way. At that point, you need prove nothing. Your presence, the calm in your eyes, the steadiness of your choices are proof enough. You will come to see that those who once wounded you have lost dominion over your story. They remain only old chapters, necessary lessons by which you learned the language of your soul. Places that once constricted breathe now as landmarks of the distance you have traveled. The fears that once fenced you in open as silent doors you can walk through without fanfare. One day you will sense that you no longer belong to that former world, not because you are alien, but because you have risen above the vibration that kept you small. This is not mythic rebirth, but the quiet maturation every soul is owed. You begin to move to a new rhythm you could not hear before, a cadence of intuition, of liberty, of coming home. You stop chasing validation and begin to draw it by the integrity of your being. You no longer clutch what was never yours, you release it as an act of self-respect. Most crucially, the old curses, family patterns, childhood wounds, the roles you forced yourself to carry, need not be smashed by force. They dissolve when you step into truth, for a curse survives only while you live as the world demands. Live as yourself, and every chain loses its relevance. At the journey's end, you are not made untouchable, you are made whole enough to need no savior. That freedom from the past is the greatest gift an awakened soul can keep. Believe this, you are not merely entering a new era, you are the new era, a time in which the true self leads. Light radiates from you rather than being hunted, and old curses are not merely broken, but rewritten into a new story. When you look back, you will understand you were not born to endure, you were born to awaken.